Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly 10-minute escape from the modern world to think about aspects of ancient warfare, where you, the reader, listener, or viewer, asks a question and I attempt to answer it. Now, you can ask us a question via a postcard or an email, or you can comment on a previous podcast or YouTube video, and we'll collate and compile all of those and then try and answer them if we can. And of course, you can back us on Patreon. There are 3 different levels. There are Legionary, Optio, and Centurion, and they are $1, $5, and $10. So you can do that and get to us that way. Now, today's question, I didn't write down who it's from. Oh, apologies. Hello, I have a question for AWA. Firstly, thank you for all the hours of enjoyment listening to the podcast. Our pleasure. They make my journeys to and from work a much more pleasurable experience. Excellent. That's exactly what they're designed for. So my question is, during Rome's wars to conquer the rest of Italy through the 5th, 4th, and 3rd centuries BC, at what point was Roman success inevitable? Ooh, interesting one. I think it's a fascinating aspect because, for me, one of the most interesting aspects of Roman history throughout its history is its determination to recover from blows and setbacks and fight on when other civilizations would have given up. Obviously, the Battle of Cannae is one instance, but going into the Italian conquest of the Italian peninsula, if you look at Caudine Forks or the Battle of the Allia, even the subsequent sacking of Rome, in 390 BC, these are things that would have really done in other civilizations, and yet Rome has the determination to keep going. And I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, obviously, but it essentially pushes on and keeps fighting and goes again when others might not have. And so in a way, the writing was on the wall that Rome was always going to push forward until it succeeded or was destroyed. And so in a way, it's inevitable early, if you like that. But then at other points, the destruction of Rome could have happened at any one of those points in time. And Rome's early history is obviously full of moments where she faced grave danger, whether it's, the famous battles, Horatius on the Bridge, or Battle of like Regulus. How am I saying that? Regulus, yes. And, those sorts of things are massive crises that Rome either is victorious in or comes back from. And so I suppose in many ways, that's part of it too. The other thing, of course, is that Rome makes treaties with its Italian allies that last a lot longer. And one of the factors in Hannibal's inability to remove Italian allies from Rome is that Rome is a good ally. And, obviously empire studies are all about the oppression of peoples by the imperial power. But that doesn't tend to be the way that Rome is regarded. Obviously, there are exceptions. There are rebellions against Rome, and we tend to focus on those because, decades, if not centuries of compliant and satisfied living don't make interesting history. That 1 year of rebellion or that couple of rebellions over an entire history of a province or a people is far more exciting than the decades of no rebellion. And of course, in the 20th century, we have the idea that even when there wasn't rebellion, there was oppression occurring, and that's a tricky thing because you're arguing from silence in many ways. But I don't want to get into that debate. That's a historiographical debate for another day. So you've got in Rome's conquest of the Italian peninsula, firstly, of course, they conquer the area immediately around Rome. Then they start to sort of expand out from there to take the Sabine people, the Volsci, and Latium and things like that. And then they move on to other parts, famously the Samnites, the Umbrians, other areas of the Italian peninsula. And, we talk about the Samnite Wars and we'll talk about all these others. But the interesting thing about those is that that is a very, we like to think of it as a systematic process. But I think the reality is that those conquests are not systematic in the sense that one area is conquered, we move on, we conquer the next. In some cases, you've got cities within conquered areas or areas that have been largely conquered that remain independent. And I think the idea of states as opposed to city states, confusingly, is one we need to keep in mind, that you can have a city that is unconquered and independent. It may be struggling, it may be doomed to be conquered, but it will get conquered eventually. And so Rome's conquest of the Italian peninsula is a centuries-long project, but it's not a systematic one. And if you flip it and don't look at it as Rome's conquest, if you look at it, for instance, as the Etruscans or the Volsci or any of the other peoples, they are also trying to do the same thing at the same time. They're warring with their neighbors, happens to be Rome and Latium. And so the sort of eventual story of Rome's success is a remarkable one because it starts out as a very small, albeit fertile and very well-to-do area. Well-to-do is the wrong word. What's the word I'm looking for? Fertile. We'll go with fertile. They are, looking to conquer their northern neighbor or their southern neighbor. And so Rome's determination and eventual success against all of these, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, is remarkable. But, you're asking when it becomes inevitable. Yeah, I don't know. If having to contradict myself, I don't know that it's ever inevitable because Rome always is on the cusp of a military disaster that we know from hindsight she will come back from. But if at any point in time those battles had gone against Rome to the point that Rome was conquered, what we would see as inevitable would not have been. And so I think there are various points in time where Rome could have stopped and gone, this was too hard, too difficult. We've suffered too many losses. And when you look at the sort of the against Veii, against the Samnites, those are long lasting campaigns of multi-generational. So it's not a looking forward to the day we are victorious. It's almost just a lifestyle choice to remain at war with your neighbors, which in a way is very similar to the Greek city-states warring with their neighbors every summer. It would seem that the Roman state has a similar sort of attitude, and the Samnites are just doing the same thing against the Romans that the Romans are trying to do against the Samnites. So these are. And I mean, in a way, having said that about the determination of the Romans, you get the same with people like the Samnites. They lose battles, but are determined to come back from those battles. And they, I suppose in a way you would ask, did they ever consider themselves conquered, or were they willing treaty members until they weren't? And I think there's, in the early parts of Rome, there's the arguments about the fact that the Italian allies should be represented in the Roman Senate, and you get that as the fomenting of the social war in the 1st century BC. So there's sort of an attitude that you get all the way through to that period in time, where we would tend to think of Italians as subject peoples to Rome, that they clearly have a sense of independence and a sense of we're just as important as you are. We need more enfranchisement. So if you take that attitude and push it backwards, they probably never lost their sense of independence, even though we think of them as not independent anymore and compliant with what Rome wants. So, you've got all sorts of things in the toing and froing of fortunes, I suppose. So, and I wonder, we talk about first wars, second wars, third wars, fourth wars. I don't know that they necessarily thought of things in the same way. Generally, they would think of them as a continuous war that re-erupts rather than is a finished thing and a second thing and a third thing and a fourth thing. It's a tricky one, and obviously there are times where, for instance, at the Battle of Caudine Forks, you've got the Samnites being victorious over the Romans. They may well have thought that they were winning at that point in time, that's 321 BC, and that therefore Italy was going to become a Samnite empire. So in that sense, we're very skewed. Obviously, we have Roman sources, but we're very skewed in our perspective. And every now and then it helps to flip it and talk about, well, actually, what if we look at this from the Samnite perspective or the Etruscan perspective, or and obviously, eventually with hindsight, those become the stories of defeat because they are defeated and absorbed. But then you have things like the social war, where are they? And then you, of course, have the enfranchisement of Italy under Augustus, and then the enfranchisement of the entire empire under Caracalla. So, in that sense, you've got that sort of sense of determination. So, the Romans aren't successful in the war with the Samnites, which begins with the Battle of the Caudine Forks, for another sort of 17 years. So that continuous warfare and the raising of new legions every year and the fighting often on multiple fronts is a really exhausting. But again, it's the sort of definition of what a Roman would have seen as their livelihood / purpose / good training, Roman discipline, all of those things. So I suppose if I'm going to be tied down, I'll say, one, it was never inevitable, and two, it was always inevitable. What a fence sitter I am. You've got the idea that most of Italy is Roman by mid 3rd century. You've then got the Punic Wars, of course. But then, after those, you've still got some resistance, shall we say. And there are some very big resistances to Roman control over their territory in the south when they, invite Tarentum, when they invite Pyrrhus. So, I'm not sure that the southern peoples of the Italian peninsula ever thought themselves truly, completely conquered. They were compliant, but I think it suited them to be so. Having said that, of course, in the Punic Wars, they remain on Rome's side. Is that because Rome is a better master, or because Carthage would be a worse master? Probably the latter. Bad master, worse master, choose the bad master. But again, that's sort of probably skewed by 20th century Marxist thinking. It's a very tricky one. I'm going to be boring and say it was never inevitable. Anyway, join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers, and I'll attempt to answer your question, hopefully more decisively than that. Thanks. Bye.